And there has to be a deference to local citizens. They're the ones that elect their prosecutor. They elect their local judges. And they really get the say in their community as to how those things are handled. The Attorney General's office does provide the information from the BCI&I to make sure that specifically violent crimes are prosecuted and investigated appropriately. And right now that agency is being underfunded by to the tune of 2/3, which is a real problem. I can tell you from my own practice, I've had cases where BCI&I has taken over a year to process that information and get results back. And I can only think of the families that have had to wait so long for those things. So we're going to make sure that we cut out the special interests and that we will actually provide the services to local law enforcement on issues like death penalty, drug pleas, and of course discovery that has to be completed.
Thank you. And Mr. Cordray.
Well, it's quite a mouthful you gave us. On the death penalty, I support the death penalty, but I've always worked to try to improve that process. When I was in the legislature, we overhauled a bill that I helped write, the death penalty jury veneer process to broaden the participation in death penalty juries. I later worked with legislators from both parties on the death penalty appeal process. Cases were getting mired in repetitive appeals, and we created a constitutional amendment to address that. I have said that I will work with the governor that in his clemency determinations, if he wants to have access to DNA evidence that may or may not have been presented at trial, to make sure that we're not executing anybody innocent, we will make BCI available on a priority basis for that. In terms of sentencing, sentencing disparities is an age-old issue, federal and state. It's been handled by the legislature, the courts, and prosecutors, and many people will need to be involved in considering that. We will constantly be reviewing that. Open discovery, I'm interested in open discovery as long as we can protect witnesses against intimidation and possible violence, but I think I agree with Mike that we should work toward that as much as possible.
Thank you all. Next question.
Mr. Owens, what experiences have you had that have helped to prepare you to become Attorney General, especially during the campaign?
Well, the process of running for Attorney General really gives us an opportunity to demonstrate for the people of Ohio how we will actually work for them in the office of Attorney General. Let me give you two examples. First of all, I'm the only candidate to sign the Buckeye Institute's pledge for open and transparent government. This is a critical step, and the lack of transparency is what has resulted over and again with the scandals that have plagued this office, whether it's CoinGate or the Democrats and Mark Dan, those kinds of things. Also, when we found that the current Attorney General was secreting records regarding the Ohio Peace Officers Training Academy, we made formal requests for those records, and when they weren't turned over, we filed a legal action on behalf of the people of Ohio to make those records be turned over. We are going to make sure that transparency is brought to the office of Attorney General, because this is what has resulted time and again with scandals in the past, and is the only way that we are going to effectively deal with things in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Background question, no need for rebuttals there. Next question, please.
Thanks. Mr. Crites, back to the headlines perhaps and the role of the Attorney General's office. In the headlines recently have been in this county and other Ohio counties and other states, voter registration issues involving Acorn and voter registration fraud. You have spoken out on the issue, and also we have now just in the last day seen the Ohio Republican Party turn to the Attorney General's office to intervene in helping to resolve the current dispute, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about the role of a prosecutor as Attorney General and the role of the Attorney General's office in general on the issue of voter registration fraud and in the specific current Acorn issues?
Sure. First of all, I've had experience investigating those kind of cases in conjunction with the Department of Justice when I was the United States Attorney. That's one of those areas of the law that where the United States Attorney has jurisdiction, he works very closely with one of the departments back in the Department of Justice on that matter. So I do have some experience in that regard. On the first day on the job, I can tell you that once I've taken the oath of office, I'll be contacting the United States Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Ohio. I'll be contacting the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Ohio, and also prosecuting attorneys in several of the large counties, Cuyahoga County being one of them, Franklin County, Hamilton County, where some of these allegations have been raised about possible voter irregularity. And I'll be making those calls for the purpose of opening an investigation to get to the bottom of this Acorn matter to find out what's been going on. It's been going on entirely too long. I'm not prejudging what has happened, but there have been too many irregularities over a long period of time. It needs to be investigated, and the public needs to be aware of what the problem is, and I'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Crites. 30 seconds, Mr. Cordray.
The right to vote is a fundamental constitutional right in our society. It is and should be sacrosanct. One of the heartening things about this election is that it looks like we're going to have absolute record turnout in Ohio, which means we have a broader cross-section of the public making public policy. That's a great thing. Voter fraud is illegal. Voter suppression is also wrong and inappropriate. My position as Attorney General will always be to stand up and fight for the rights of voters first and foremost. That's where my heart will be.
Mr. Owens.
Once again, we have an issue where my opponents are blowing empty rhetoric and we're taking substantive action. Our campaign is organizing a vote observer project to have people at the boards of elections that are going to be able to observe our vote, that are going to be specifically trained to look for vote fraud as it's going on, that are going to be armed with phone numbers, armed with lawyers that they can call to immediately file action if fraud is taken care of. If anybody is interested in joining that vote observer project, join up at owens2008.com and you can get involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, the next question.
Thank you. As I look around the room at some of the students who will soon be heading off to college, some of the senior citizens who have joined us today, I'm wondering what plans the candidates have regarding consumer protection should they be fortunate enough to be elected. Thank you.
Mr. Owens.
Thank you. Consumer protection obviously is a very critical aspect of the Attorney General's office. And the bottom line here is that is the Attorney General going to work as an advocate for the people of Ohio, or are there going to be barriers between justice and the people of Ohio? And once again here we have that issue of are big money special interests going to prevent things? Now Mr. Crites has talked about this lead paint issue and says, well, just because I've promised to dismiss lead paint action and then took money from lead paint people, don't worry about that, things will be just fine. Yet he criticizes the representative of the Democratic Party for the same appearance of impropriety. That's a double standard that won't happen in our campaign. We will actually do consumer protection because we don't have the barriers to prevent us from putting the people of Ohio first.
1 minute, Mr. Crites.
Consumer protection is one of the unique areas that the Attorney General has responsibility for and has since the 1970s. I can tell you that while much of my experience, certainly not all of my experience, but much of my experience has been on the law enforcement side of the house, I have significant experience as the United States Attorney on the civil side where we were investigating and filing civil complaints involving fraud, which is essentially what much of the consumer protection law is all about. I can tell you that I will aggressively enforce the consumer protection laws, whether it be predatory lending, credit card fraud, ID fraud, Medicaid fraud, seniors being defrauded, or the more vulnerable members of our society being defrauded. I can tell you that would be a very, very high priority in my administration. But I can tell you that while I will go ahead and enforce that to the limit, that I will not go ahead and step over the line, which in my humble estimation Mark Dan did on occasion, and stretched beyond belief the prosecution of those kinds of cases. Now, having said that, with respect to the students, I think it's very important that credit card fraud needs to be looked at. I think Rich Cordray and I both have taken a position in support of certain bills in the General Assembly right now that would protect students, college students on campus from marketing people such as that, credit card fraud. Thank you.
Thank you. And 1 minute to Mr. Cordray.
I've been fighting for consumers for 18 years. Back when I was in the legislature, we passed bills to prevent consumer fraud in real estate and in other areas. When I was the state solicitor, I defended the constitutionality of the state's charitable solicitation laws, preventing the kinds of frauds and scams that are often cloaked in the guise of some sort of appeal for giving money to charities. As treasurer, those have been major issues for me, and we have fought for fair protection of consumers against unfair practices by the credit card companies. A lot of that involves marketing credit cards aggressively on campus to young people who have left home for the very first time and who may not realize that they can ruin their credit report even though they're trying to keep their GPA up, and they can build up a debt that drives them out of school faster than their student loan debt does. And we are going to fight for legislation on that front. We're going to carefully monitor fraudulent practices on the campuses, and I will work with the universities to protect student information from being sold to the credit card companies